welcome back. Now, in the Code of Professional Conduct, we're going to start talking about confidentiality. It is no coincidence that confidentiality is the first tenet listed under the CPC. Confidentiality is by far the, I would say, tenet that means the most to deaf people. Outside of, I would say professionalism is a close second, but confidentiality is paramount. And I'd like for you guys just to think about for a second, especially if you're not a deaf person. I know some of our students in this class are deaf. But think to yourself, especially as a hearing person who may not have utilized interpreting services before, what it must be like to have a third party involved in every single part of your life. Ugly, pretty, it doesn't matter. Every part of your life. And not only a third party, but a third party who probably knows your friends and maybe relatives, because it's a very small community. And so they get to see everything that happens in your life, and you're entrusting them with all of that information to not leak it to other people that they probably know who you know. I can't imagine what that must be like. And so I think about that very often when I'm interpreting, because I want to make sure that I keep the trust of my clients, whether they be hearing or deaf. And I don't know, I try to keep that in the back of my mind every time I go on an interpreted situation. And you may even think that something is inconsequential. You may think, oh, well, it doesn't matter if Bobby knows. Oh, by the way, I always refer to everything as Bobby and Susie. Those are my deaf people, always. Anyway, maybe it doesn't matter if Bobby knows that Susie is taking an English class at the college. Well, maybe Susie doesn't want Bobby to know that she is taking a class at the college. Maybe there's a particular reason. Heck, maybe she's in the witness protection program. You don't know. I mean, that's obviously very extreme, but you don't know. You have no idea. And so no matter what the information is, whether it even seems like it's not ugly information, you still need to keep that confidential. Okay? So the tenet reads, interpreters adhere to standards of confidential communication. Which, again, that was the sentence that we were given a long time ago, and it's like, okay, well, so we keep things confidential. But it didn't really give any more explanation than that. And so, one thing to note under the guiding principle, and you can read that for yourself later, but that is that it applies to every situation. However, every situation confidentiality may look a little different. Now, this is a very hot topic for both interpreters and for consumers. And a lot of people would say it doesn't matter what situation you're in, confidentiality should always look the same. I personally would disagree. But it's not WWLD. It's not what would Lael do. Okay, it's how do you interpret this document to mean. I personally interpret it to mean it's not always the same. However, I always err on the side of confidentiality. Always. So, for example, exceptions of confidentiality would include, as we had mentioned in some of the descriptions prior to this, any federal or state laws that mandate that you have to divulge that information. Some of those examples would be threats of suicide, child abuse, responding to subpoenas, all of those types of things. They're going to mandate that you divulge the information. You've got to spill. You don't have a choice in that situation, okay? I mean, I guess you do, but your choice is going to jail, or not, I guess. Anyway, so under 1.1, under the illustrative behaviors, it speaks of sharing assignment-related information only on a confidential and as-needed basis, okay, such as with supervisors, interpreter team members, members of the educational team, hiring entities, and in every single situation, this may not be the case. Those might not be as-needed bases. You may need to check into, you'd have to look at it on an individual basis. Let me think. For example, if I am working in a mental health setting, okay, it may be important that the psychologist or whomever that I'm working with, first of all, that they let me know, or that I let them know, if there's any imminent danger there. If the deaf person looks as though they're being erratic, or the hearing person, it depends if it's a deaf psychologist, whoever the patient is, that they may be acting strangely, or that they're ready to cause themselves or somebody else bodily harm. Now again, that may be one of those threats of abuse that you would need to report, but at the same time you need to keep yourselves safe, right? I will tell you this, if the psychologist leaves the room, I'm leaving the room, because I'm not going to stay in there with some crazy person. And no offense to anybody, but I'm not staying in there with a crazy person. Another as-needed basis. If I have an interpreter team, say, and sometimes this happens just dependent on scheduling, where they come in a little bit later than you. Maybe they had a class that backed up to the class you're working in, and so they get there a little bit late. Then as they get in there, or if we're switching off, I'm going to make sure that I share with them any signs that we've set up, any concepts that we've gone over, any of that kind of information, to ensure, that's really just to ensure that the message has fluidity, to make sure that we are providing the best quality services that we possibly can. Not to gossip about the person, nothing to that extent, but just to make sure that we're on the same page as far as the services that we are providing. For example, there are some deaf people who will use maybe out-of-state signs that we're not used to. I want to make sure and convey that to the next interpreter so that they know, so that that deaf person isn't constantly having to be like, wait, I don't understand what you're talking about. It just makes sense. Or the same thing as far as the English goes. So that's one thing to make sure that you do. Some people will disagree with me and say, no, even then the next interpreter just needs to figure it out on their own. That's not personally how I work, but be aware that you might see that out there, okay? 1.2 talks about managing your documents in a very secure manner, and that's true. I agree with that. I think that, you know, if you have a PDA, if you have documents like paper documents, emails, anything like that, you need to ensure that you're talking about things in code or a confidential way so that other people aren't understanding what you're talking about. Even when I would be going out on assignments, and I will tell you, I used to be black and white. I used to be like, no, I will never tell anybody where I'm going, and it just doesn't matter. I was living with my parents when I first became an interpreter, and they'd be like, oh, so are you going to interpret? And I'd be like, I don't know. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. You know, and they'd be like, okay. You know, and they'd say, well, so are you going to a bad part of town? Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. If I die, I just die. You know, and I mean, it was ridiculous. Like, I was black and white. Now, I'm a little more flexible on that. What I do is, if I know that I'm going somewhere, I will write down the agency's information in an envelope. I will put it in an envelope. And my husband does not know anything about the deaf community, but even still, I try to keep the information confidential. So I will put that in an envelope. I will let him know where that is, and after I leave, I say, if I don't come home or call by a certain time, then you can go in and look for that information, call the agency, try to find out where I am. But other than that, even with my husband, who knows nothing about the deaf community, I still try to keep confidential information confidential. Also, again, 1.3 talks about inform consumers when federal or state mandates require disclosure of the confidential information. So if you've got a spill, then it's important to at least let that person know, hey, I know you just told me about this, and I'm so sorry, but I'm going to have to tell someone. I've had that happen before, where people have told me stuff like threats of suicide or things like that, and I'm like, you know, I'm so sorry that you shared that with me, because I'm not trying to be a rat. I'm not trying to, you know, I don't know, be a gossip, but now I have to tell someone. And I'll even walk them over with whomever it is that I'm supposed to be speaking with, just so that they can see exactly what it is that I'm telling that person about them. But it is important that we disclose the fact that we're going to have to spill that confidential information at that point. Alright, next we'll be talking about professionalism, so think about that. Enjoy!